For military purposes, we needed to add several things. You have to add rank distinctions, since you need to know, the rank of is he a private, is he a corporal, sergeant, officer, whatever. You also need to add some identifying characteristics or marks so that you can tell what unit the person is in, and which branch of service, etc. And then you also need to add some things that will allow the soldier to perform his duties, because he has to be able to carry certain things with him and have certain things with him. And you guys, if that sun comes out, feel free to come under here under the shade, because I don't want to bake you out there while we're waiting.
Let's just do it now.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know to start with.
I want to watch them, you know.
2:30.
Oh, okay. I'll mark.
That's fine, just when you get to the continental.
Yeah.
You don't have to eat.
So we're gonna have, if you look at our soldier who's standing out there now,
I've been
basically
dismissed.
he's wearing that gentleman's three-piece suit that we talked about. He's got knee breeches on, although you can't see the ends of them, because he's got some wool leggings on there. But he's got stocking shoes. He's got the vest or waistcoat. He's got the shirt, the neck stock, the coat, the hat. So he's basically wearing the garments that a gentleman would wear, but this is sort of the military version thereof. So he has got
You're better dressed than
he's got tape around his buttonholes, or sometimes we call it lace. It's white and it has blue and yellow stripe in it. So that helps identify what regiment he's a member of. You know that he's a redcoat, so he's part of the regular British Army. He has got some adaptations of things, so he's over his stockings. He's got some wool leggings, and these keep the brush from snagging up his stockings, and hopefully keep things from getting in his shoes so much, because there was a lot more underbrush in North America than there was in most places in Europe or Great Britain. So that was one adaptation that you saw a lot of, was something covering the men's legs. He's also got things hanging on straps across his shoulders. So he's got his blanket, and rolled up in his blanket he may have, extra shoe soles or heels or shirts or stockings or whatever. And then on his left hip he has a haversack and a canteen, his haversack will have his rations. The canteen will have his water and his ration of rum for today, which every man should get a gill of rum, about kind of a shot glass size, more or less, on a daily basis. And then on his right hip he has a cartridge pouch, which is leather, and carries his pre-measured cartridges of black powder. The leather then is a protective, to keep sparks from getting in there. And so those are things that are practical to tell what rank he is. He has a shoulder epaulette, a white shoulder epaulette on his right shoulder, which tells you that he's a corporal. If he gets a little closer, you'll be able to see that in addition to that taping around his buttonholes with the blue and yellow stripes in it, he also will have, this is a K8 that's on the button, that tells you he's in the 8th Regiment of Foot. And that's important because the British Army, the oldest regiment of infantry is the 1st Regiment. And that's something that he would want you to know, because they have a long history of service. And also he's got those blue facings, which tell you that they're a royal regiment, meaning the king or queen in some year or other has gotten has given them a special privilege of being known by the king's regiment. This unit actually did fight in the western territories of the United States, which we're in now. What was then the western United States. King's 8th fought at Mackinac. And they had people stationed at Mackinac, Niagara, and all along the frontier with Canada. And they were stationed at various times in places in Indiana. So they actually are a unit that did their fighting out here. But I want you to look at the cut of that coat and just kind of keep that in your mind, because that is the standard military coat that all people in North America were used to looking at, because there was no American Army. We were a British colony, so the Army was the British Army. So that's what they were, that was the standard, British infantrymen that they were used to seeing stationed in Boston Common and various other places in the colonies. When the war started at Lexington and Concord in 1775, there was no American Army. Sort of war broke out, shots were fired, the locals came out and surrounded the town of Boston, which was British headquarters at the time, and penned up the British in Boston. They eventually had to flee by ship and go off to Nova Scotia and then come back and made their new headquarters in New York. But when you're going to, if you're going to now start an American Army, a United States Army or rebel army as the perspective may be, basically, your army is going to look something like this, because this is what armies look like. And so what we'll see from now on, pretty much, with a couple of exceptions, are variations of our standard British infantryman's uniform. So keep this look in mind, and it's just a different color combination. He still has knee breeches on. He has stockings. He has what we call a half gaiter or a spatterdash that covers. He's got leather breeches on instead of wool or linen, because those help protect his legs from the sparks. He's got some slightly different equipment, but basically he's got a different style of cartridge pouch. He's got the white one, which is based on a Royal Artillery pouch. But basically he's got the same pieces of equipment as we saw in our British infantrymen. Our 3rd New York soldier in the gray coat, you can see that his coats start out being the same way, but it's a little shorter and doesn't have a collar. And how come is that? Well, they've tried to figure out, as best as they can, the number of men that were in, they know the number of men that were in that unit on a certain date, and that they got gray cloth and green cloth. And there wasn't enough to make full long coats with collars and cuffs and lapels for all the men. So this is our best interpretation of what the 3rd New York's coats look like. They're a Continental or Federal Army, unit from the state of New York, and they tried to get as uniform as they could. And the way to do that was, and rather than make some of the men a full-length coat and others no coat, is say have everybody have a coat that's a little bit shorter with no collar, because they didn't have quite enough cloth to go all the way around. So you can see how they're keeping the same styles. He still has the same knee breeches, waistcoat, etc. His equipment has seen a lot of wear. Obviously, that hat has been around for a day or so. So they have it, and it looks like, you can see a difference between, somebody who's portraying a unit that just got issued clothing and a unit that maybe their last clothing issue was a year ago, and they've been wearing that on campaign, and they're hoping that they can get a new issue of clothing, pretty soon. I also want to mention hats for a second. You'll notice that the hats that we've seen that are, we might call them tricorns. This is a military style of cocked hat, because when you shoulder your musket, which is the basic position of the soldier under arms, you hold it in your left hand like that. And so if you had a point on your hat that was sticking right out on the side like that, you'd be knocking your hat off all the time. So the military hat was worn slightly skewed off to one side, so that it left kind of just that little kind of a little curve right there where the musket could fit when the man shouldered his musket. And if you see somebody wearing, say, a round hat that is not pinned up into being a three-cornered hat like that, such as our light infantryman who's behind there, it'll still be up on that left-hand side so that the men can shoulder their musket. So we've got 2 New York soldiers, 1 artilleryman, 1 infantryman, the 3rd New York Regiment and Hamilton's New York State Artillery.
Thank you.
We often hear that the British did not adapt to conditions in North America and continued. You can see that they've gone to a tighter fitting jacket that's just waist length. They've gone to overalls or gaiter trousers, which is a one-piece garment, instead of having knee breeches and stockings out the same way as a big round hat. But that's much more practical in terms of keeping your face in the shade, keeping the rain off your face, when you're on campaign. The light infantry, there was one light infantry company in every British regiment, and the purpose of that company was to go out in front of a line of marching soldiers and screen for enemy, or they would screen along the side of the roads on a march to make sure that there wasn't an enemy attack from the side, so that they had a slightly different function than the regular heavy infantry. And so because of that, they needed to be a little more streamlined, and so they streamlined their uniforms in this fashion so that they could slightly, more easily perform that function without getting all snagged up on the underbrush with, fancier uniforms and tape around their buttonholes and all that kind of thing. So this is an example of the fact that, in fact, we know that the British Army did adapt itself to warfare conditions in North America, the 2nd Battalion of Light Infantry. And our next soldier is a member of the Brigade of Guards. The Brigade of Guards did the changing the guard in Buckingham Palace. So in England, they would have worn a very fancy uniform with knee breeches and tall white gaiters tightly fitted to their legs. They would have had white taping around all the buttonholes on the coat and along the edges of the cuffs and the lapels. This is the Grenadier Company. They're kind of the opposite of the light infantry company. They were like the heavy infantry that held the end of the line against a flank attack. 3 different regiments of guards came over to America for the war. And we know that they cut the coats somehow. We're assuming they cut them shorter, as you see here. They took all the white taping off from around the buttonholes and the edges of the lapels. Instead of wearing that tall bearskin cap, they used a hat. It's a felt hat like the other hats you've seen, but they kind of cut it down, made a little brim, and they did put a piece of bearskin along the crest to, remind people of their status as the heavy grenadier shock troops. But it's a much more simplified uniform than you would and have seen them wear in England. They also went to trousers so that they didn't have to worry about stockings snagging up and everything. And the knee breeches tended to be wool, the trousers tended to be linen, so they're more practical for summer warfare conditions in the North American colonies. So this is another example of how we know that a documented fact, or example of British troops adapting their uniforms to warfare conditions in North America. A couple things we haven't mentioned yet. He's got a bayonet that goes on the end of his musket. So everybody, most of the people used a smoothbore weapon, a musket. It's a military weapon. One of it had 2 main advantages. One, it could fire more quickly than a rifle, and the second is it could fit a bayonet at the end. And if you see, 50 or even 10 guys coming at you with their bayonets fixed like that, you do not want to be standing in front of them, let me tell you. So it's a really scary sight, and the British are frequently commended for their use of the bayonet. We were talking about rank distinctions before. He's got a red waist sash and a blue and gold epaulet on his shoulder and a sword. All of those things will tell you that he is a sergeant. So he's a sergeant in the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, the King's personal household troops. They did then and still do things like changing the guard at the royal palaces, etc. And 1,000 of them came to North America to fight in the American Revolution. Thank you. I think so. Why don't you go ask your daddy? We also had specialized troops on both sides, and we've got an example here of a light dragoon. Light dragoons are like cavalry. The men were cross-trained to fight on horseback or on foot. And again, you'll see basically the same cut of coat here that we're looking at. The same, he's got the breeches on, but he's got long boots because he is, is a horseback rider. Also, instead of the big, heavy cartridge pouch with the nails are shorter and wider. They have a slightly different style of cuff, a wider cuff. You'll see that the linings and the skirts of the coats, rather than being white as you saw in the British, are a contrasting color to the uniform, so that the French and German armies were rather similar in a lot of the style of thing that they used. You'll see they both have a leather-covered or a fur-covered pack of some kind. One's a backpack and one goes over the shoulder. But those are their packs in which they would carry their extra equipment, uniform, shirts, socks, stockings, that sort of thing. And then our German soldier in the dark blue also has, you can see his cartridge pouch on his right hip, and then on his left hip he's got his haversack and canteen, as well as his turnster, which is the fur-covered pack that he's got his extra clothing and stuff in. But the coats have, are pretty similar in cut, and we think that probably King George, sometimes we call the Germans all Hessians, which they were not. This particular unit was from the state of Brunswick, and rather than Hesse or Hesse-Kassel. And we often call them mercenaries. That's not really quite true. It wasn't like they were individual, bloodthirsty men who, advertised their services. More, a lot of them were actually farmers, and King George paid the princes and dukes of the various, states that later became modern Germany to send troops over to help out, because the British were running short of troops during the war, because it was kind of a world war, and they were expecting an attack from France against Britain, and so King George III hired or paid some of his German relatives to provide him with some extra troops. And the Brunswick Regiment von Riedesel actually was captured fairly early in the war at the Battle of Saratoga, and were in captivity for the rest of the time. And a lot of them never went back home to Germany. They stayed in the United States because they were in prison camps in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of other Germans living there, and so a lot of them actually stayed here and became farmers after the war was over, which tells you a little bit about how they weren't necessarily the wicked mercenaries that their reputation sometimes has them being. The French sent troops also allied with the United States. We think probably without the French help, the United States might not have won the revolution. At the end of the war, the French sent a huge naval force as well as a huge land force, and the battle that was sort of a climax to all that was down at Yorktown in Virginia. And Lauzon's Legion here, our soldier in the lighter blue coat, actually were holding the point on the river across the river from Yorktown against Tarleton's Legion, some kind of infamous loyalists fighting on the British side. So they had a major impact on the outcome of the war, and were very important to the American war effort. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll conclude with the Allied troops on both sides. The French, represented by Lauzon's Legion, and the Germans, represented by Brunswick Regiment von Riedesel. Thank you very much. And